about us. Many things we don't talk, many things we don't love us. It will be like highway.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, by the time that you watch this, the date is June 25th, 2026, and we are just off the cusp of the results in the Colombian election, and we are going to have to get Gustavo Petro, who is the current president of Colombia's lawyer, back on the show because there's a lot of mischief going on and involving this election. Now, we are waiting for Nigerian journalist David Hundeyin, who is going to be on the show briefly. I can't wait to have a conversation with my African brother. But in the meantime, let's talk about Colombia right now. So, if you wasn't paying attention, there was a election in Colombia. Gustavo was not able to be reelected because I believe this is his final term. So he has endorsed a person for president by the name of Cepeda. I hope I am saying this man's name correctly because English is my first language. And unfortunately, in American schools, they do not teach us properly how to speak other people's names. Only the European names. So, Cepeda is the left-wing candidate who was running very, very close to first place. If not, he was first place. And we had a right-winger who apparently won by 1%, which is why there's a demand of a recount. This right-winger was 10th place running up in the elections. 10th place. So it absolutely makes absolutely no sense how this Colombian right-winging candidate, who is American, by the way, from Miami, by the way. So we're going to get Dan Kovalik on to talk about that next week as things get together. But right now, I want to bring onto the show for the first time on Jabari Media. I have been following this brother's work for a while now, and I'm so pleased to have him on the show. David Hundeyin. Am I saying your name correctly, brother?
Hundeyin. It's close enough.
Hundeyin. Close enough. Pleased to meet you and welcome to Jabari Media.
Thank you for having me.
So I have been looking for a while for legitimate independent journalists that have an actual understanding of Africa, that is actually from Africa. And I've learned about you from watching my friend Jamaro Thomas, who's been on the show as well too. So, and also Breakthrough News, I'm affiliated with them as well too. So I was like, I gotta get in touch with this brother. You are the CEO of Spearhed. Is that a fully independent platform? Are you guys affiliated with any other African journalist platforms?
We are fully independent. We are politically, we're anti-imperialist, pan-Africanist. That's our thing.
Awesome.
I wouldn't say we're affiliated. However, I used to work for African Stream, so you can call us a sort of like ideological descendant of African Stream.
And African Stream was gutted during the Biden administration, right? Was attacked just like RT was. Yeah. So see, Democrats like to censor too for people that don't know. But if you watch this show, you should know by now. One of the questions I wanted to bring you on the show to talk to you about is the relationship between the Sahel states and Nigeria. As we know, Nigeria, they are also going through an election right now, right? That's very that does not have integrity at all comparing to what's happening in Colombia.
Yeah, so it's probably going to be worse, actually.
Oh my God. What should we expect out of this election? Will there be backlash, or is the Nigerian people just accepting like how the American people are when it comes to these elections?
So I guess that's the answer that I'm looking for as well, because my heart says finally that long awaited backlash, as you call it, is going to happen. Finally, this full-scale nationwide rebellion that needs to happen for Nigeria's sake and for Africa's sake, that finally this will be the trigger. But my head says that the project of subduing Nigerians, of pacifying Nigerians, not in a good way, but in a military way, has been very successful by the usual external actors led by the US State Department. So Nigerians, I think, by and large, seem to have reached the point. I hope I'm wrong about this, but Nigerians seem to have reached the point where it's like there's really no bottom, and it's not possible for a Nigerian to think this is too much for me. This is too much suffering. This has gone on way too long. This has gone too far. This has exceeded my elastic limit. It feels as if there is no elastic limit. They just keep expanding forever, indefinitely. I hope I'm wrong about this. I'm the happiest person in the world to be wrong about this. I want to be wrong about this. But again, my head is telling me that why would it be different now? Because this scenario has played out already. It played out 4 years ago, where there was this almighty youth-led push to try and putting a new, supposedly independent candidate, and the system just sort of thumbed its nose very, very rashly, very rudely at everyone and said, do your worst. And nobody did anything. So if that he wasn't even, the current president wasn't even in power at the time. He was just a candidate. So now that he's actually in power, now that he controls the security forces and the electoral commission and the judiciary, because in Nigeria, the judiciary is not financially independent of the executive. So the president basically has functional control over the judiciary. That being the case, why would he lose power? And if people didn't react the way they were supposed to in 2023, why would they do so now? That's just, so again, I hope I'm wrong about this. I hope my heart is right about this, because my heart is like, this has to be it. This really, really just has to be it. Because if it doesn't happen now, is it ever going to happen? So I guess we wait and see.
Is there also a alternative that would you say a true alternative that they can be behind that's running, or is this just an election of all just how it is here, oligarchical puppets?
So I always like to joke that Nigeria is basically America without America's money, influence, or wealth. Nigeria resembles the US in so many ways, in all the negative ways, I mean. One of the chief ways that Nigeria resembles the US is that there is no left wing in Nigeria. It just doesn't exist. So I can't think of any other country on the planet with a population above 100 million people that genuinely does not have a leftist movement. Be that democratic socialist, be that communist, anti-imperialist, Marxist, Pan-Africanist, there is none in the Nigerian mainstream political space. It just doesn't exist. So all the candidates, this might surprise you to know, in a typical Nigerian election, all the candidates will run on the same set of promises. They'll run on essentially the same manifesto.
Wow.
Promising to do the same things. And those things essentially boil down to IMF recommendations. Because the basic awareness that IMF recommendations are not good for you hasn't really percolated into the mainstream of Nigerian society. So people don't even know that the IMF is not your friend.
Right.
The IMF is an imperial institution whose job is to keep you in poverty. People don't know these things. Right. So part of the job we are doing at the Spearhed is literally leading a public education campaign to try and teach people some very basic things about how the world works. Things which you would consider to be obvious because you've grown up in the belly of a beast. So its nature is not hidden from you. Or for those of us who grew up on the continent, you have to understand we've had a very different experience. And by the way, this is partly why you hear this complaint a lot from African Americans that when they meet African immigrants in the US, the African immigrants don't seem to understand the nature of white supremacy and their relationship with the power structure, and they almost think that they're kind of superior to them and that kind of thing. That's where it comes from. because we have a very, very shielded experience of how the world works. And so we are taught that our poverty and our underdevelopment is 100% a result of the corruption of the local elites. We are never taught that this local elite is not really an elite because it has no independence and it doesn't answer to the local economy or to the local people. That it's a comprador class that was installed by colonialists when they were leaving. Believe it or not, we do not know these things. As basic as they would seem to be for you, most of us have no idea because a lot of investment has gone into keeping Africans completely disconnected from their reality. So in Nigeria, for example, where I come from, pretty much all of the mainstream Nigerian media space is either directly owned by US interests or is funded by US interests. So
wow, the similarities are so crazy with the vassal states in Latin America. So crazy.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing where the Omidyar Network, the Ford Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, what's the other one? The Gates Foundation. These sort of governments, supposed NGOs that are government funded, they basically control the entire information space. So everything you see and hear is controlled by the US State Department by 1 or 2 degrees of separation. So as a result, what you would consider to be basic knowledge, a lot of us do not have it. So part of the job we are trying to do at the Spearhed is basically trying to teach full-grown adults that everything you know is a lie. Everything you think you know, you don't know.
So difficult. Oh God, it sounds stressful.
It is. It absolutely is.
When you talk about like also, you know, the disconnect of the understanding between African Americans and also Africans, you kind of see that also here in the States with the Democratic Party, where you have the first black president. He actually isn't of African American descent, where he has slavery in his ancestry. He's actually his father is actually from Kenya. So of course, when he came into office, there wasn't really, when you see in his policy, there wasn't really a strong connection. He'll do something popular, but he always sounded out of touch when talking about African Americans. Same thing with Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is Jamaican descent and also Indian as well too. But when she talked about Juneteenth, you know, you would expect her to go into a soliloquy of how Juneteenth is about freedom and how it was hidden. So that's why in Texas it was late. You know, she goes right into vote. Like she has learned nothing. She just automatically assumes that she was right, and everything that is happening is understanding that she should be in office by now, and that's exactly the way they act.
Funny story. You may or may not know this. Funny story. Barack Obama's father, the original Obama, he was part of something called Airlift Africa. I think this was in the 60s, where the CIA went around the continent identifying its sort of best and brightest and basically airlifted a bunch of people to the US and indoctrinated them.
Oh, wow.
And basically turned them into its assets. So that's a long-winded way of saying Barack Obama's dad was CIA asset.
I've never known that. That's crazy. And that's kind of similar to what he was doing with Cubans as well too during his tenure. Was very, very interesting. Yeah, I mean, so with this understanding and the knowledge, this is exactly you know, I'm curious to how is the Sahel influence, them being so close. Is the media, I guess the media that is controlled is very good at twisting the narrative of the Sahel region. Wow.
Yeah, so as a Nigerian, if you do not make a special effort to look for information sources outside of the orthodox information sources in the country, all you will ever hear about the Sahel is democracy versus dictatorship, and how these are dictators and they seize power in a coup, and you don't even hear the term government or administration. You always hear the term junta or regime. As I'm sure you know, neuro-linguistic programming is like a core feature of US propaganda. So they weaponize words. Sorry, give me a second.
No problem. No problem, brother.
Yeah. They weaponize words and make it such that once you interact with a certain thing and you hear it described a certain way, your brain switches off. So once you hear a government described as a regime or a junta, that automatically has triggered a part of your brain to think there is something bad about it. And that's all you will ever hear. So the fact that Burkina Faso, for example, we are witnessing essentially the construction of an entire country in front of us in real time. We're seeing, like, let me not overstate it by calling it a China style thing, but it's like the 60 years worth of infrastructure that wasn't built, we're seeing it being developed in real time in front of us, using a new development paradigm that we have never seen before on this continent, which should be the biggest story in West Africa.
Right.
All you're hearing and all you're seeing in Nigerian media about, first of all, it's generally not covered at all. There's like this huge blackout. When it is covered, all you'll ever see is terrorists attacked so and so place, and basically the junta is too weak to do anything about it. That's all you ever hear. You don't hear it. So the fact that there's a whole government agency in Burkina Faso which was spun out of what began as a volunteer effort to build infrastructure. It has now been codified into a government agency, and they're building infrastructure at record-breaking speed by African standards. And we're seeing this in real time, and you can track this. You can see pictures and videos. None of it is being acknowledged in Nigerian media for two reasons. First of all, obviously, it's not in the interest of the US government, obviously, to promote that alternative left-wing development paradigm to a Nigerian audience. Nigeria is one of it's basically its prime puppet territory. Nigeria and Kenya are its prime puppet territories on the African continent. But also, even from a local perspective, the local pseudo elite in Nigeria, whose existence depends on Nigeria remaining exactly the way it is, they also have an interest in the Nigerian people not realizing that there's an alternative and that it's next door to them and it's actually working. So they have an alternative to maintain this information blackout. So even the news platforms that have the ability, like maybe financially, they are not necessarily all that tethered to external funding. They have the ability to cover certain topics. You will never see it on them either. So there's this huge conspiracy of silence in Nigeria, basically. Nigeria is acting like it's a hostile state, like it's an enemy of the Sahel.
Wow. Do you think that they will actually, after the election, try to join in a coalition with the terroristic groups to try and overthrow the Sahel states?
So that's a difficult question to answer. They've definitely tried before. So in 2023, they attempted to invade Niger, and more recently, I believe earlier this year, or was it late last year, when the coup in Benin happened, they actually invaded, and the Nigerian Air Force actually bombed.
Yeah, I put it on pause, so we're good. You were talking about how the Nigeria bombed Benin, which happened earlier this year. That was crazy.
Yeah, and I'm still struggling to come to terms with the fact that that happened. The country that used to lead African independence movements and fund them is now acting as a vassal and airstriking its neighbors like the way apartheid South Africa used to. That is mind-blowing to me. But as to whether Nigeria will actually, so what I suspect is more likely will happen is that Nigeria, as it's already doing, will offer itself up as a forward operating base for the usual suspects to try and stage invasions into the Sahel. I don't think Nigeria will play an active part in it. I don't think Nigeria has the capacity to play an active part in it, because part of what has been done to Nigeria is that even its own internal security capability has been severely degraded. Severely. So you're talking about a country of supposedly 240 million people, which now has a US military base on its soil, because supposedly 240 million people and supposedly the third largest economy in Africa, and it somehow cannot raise a military strong enough to defend its own borders, supposedly.
Wow.
So that's
That's
the
very
situation that
similar to
Nigeria.
how the Vasal states in the Middle East, the Gulf states, they are very rich in wealth, but they cannot defend themselves properly. It's just insane.
Yeah, I mean, the, the situation in Nigeria is probably worse than that in the Gulf, because of the Gulf,
Mhm.
at the very least, even though it's a Faustian bargain, they do get something out of that partnership, right?
Mhm.
They get the pretense of normalcy, and they get to cosplay being wealthy, right? They get to play with lots of money, and yeah, Nigeria doesn't even get that. So Nigeria has like it's the world headquarters of multidimensional poverty. So there are more people living in extreme poverty in Nigeria than anywhere else in the world, including India.
Oh wow, wow!
So
For
basically,
such a
Nigeria has
rich
got
nation.
absolutely yes, Nigeria has got absolutely nothing out of this U.S. puppet relationship that it has. But here we are.
And you know, this is on purpose. We know because Africa is literally the melting pot of diverse resources, and they will never ever, like, it will have to be forced, like in the Sahel region, for sovereignty of resources to come back to these countries. It's just, France is trying everything they can, low key. So I was wondering, what does Eritrea play in all of this? Because they're like one of the first, from my understanding, to have such a long lasting socialist, besides Tunisia. I think Tunisia. Am I saying Tunisia right? If I'm saying that name incorrectly.
Tanzania.
Tanzania. Sorry about that. So Eritrea, are they somehow involved, or are they communicating with Niger or Mali, or is there a relationship between them?
I know there's a diplomatic relationship, but I don't think there's much of like a military or economic relationship, for the simple reason of geography. So they're
Okay,
still heavily separated by countries which are hostile to both. So
right.
that's a problem. And then secondly, and perhaps just as importantly, uh, Eritrea is still quite poor. So there's a limit to what they could do. To be honest,
Mm,
they're not as poor as maybe 20, 25 years ago, but they're still quite
mhm.
poor. So they're not
Okay,
in a position, for example, to render sovereign assistance, to export military equipment or that sort of thing. They're not quite there. They're still at the stage of their development where they've just got past the point of building enough dams to sort out their internal water supply issues, and they've just got past those thresholds. So they've just about got past the point where then they need food aid, that sort of thing. They've just about crossed that threshold now. So
okay,
before they're going to get to the point of any significant strength, we're still talking another 15, 20 years. They're on their
yeah,
way. It's just
yeah,
really,
yeah.
really
Takes
slow
time.
because they're sanctioned to
Yeah,
hell and back.
they called
Yeah.
them the African North Korea. I've heard that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not an exaggeration, because they if for example you visit, first of all, it's very difficult to officially get into Eritrea. If you actually visit and you have the Eritrean stamp in your passport, most countries in the West will either not grant you a visa because you've been to Eritrea, or at the very least you'll be subjected to enhanced
Wow.
interrogation. Yeah, I have a friend who has a British passport, he's a British citizen, right? He traveled to Eritrea, and when he came back to the UK, he was a UK citizen, and when he came back, he was questioned at the airport. Like they took him
Okay.
aside and questioned him, a UK citizen. So Eritrea is like it's a country that I sympathize a lot with. I understand what they're going through, and right now they're just unfortunately not in a situation where they can do much.
Mm, mm. I mean, it makes perfect sense. I always wondered about them because you don't really hear that much information about them.
Mm.
And every person besides Nipsey Hussle, every person I know that is from Eritrea or know of, um, they haven't had nice things to say about Eritrea. And I'm like, are you sure? Like, I don't know, because you are over
Yeah,
here. When's the
yeah,
last time you've been over there?
they would never, they would obviously not have nice things to say about it, because um, as an unavoidable result of the development path that Eritrea chose, which was sort of self-reliance, share almost, if you like, which is kind of similar to what they do in North Korea. As a result of that development path, there are lots of conveniences which have to be foregone. There are lots of freedoms which are not available, at least not yet. That is an unavoidable consequence of choosing a specific development path where you've decided that your nation's sovereignty comes before anything else. Right. So in a world where, for example, your ability to have widespread internet access might mean compromising your nation's sovereignty, there's always a trade-off, right? So as I was saying some weeks back, there are countries on the African continent that chose a completely different development path, and I don't think those countries are better off than Eritrea. So a country like Nigeria, for example, Nigeria has all of the freedoms that Eritrea supposedly does not have, right? So Nigeria, you have your wide open internet access, high speed internet access everywhere, where you can go on gambling websites, you can watch porn, you can do everything that supposedly they can't do in Eritrea. What has Nigeria got out of it? What's the net benefit that Nigeria has reaped from all of this? Because all that means is that Western capital has the ability to enter and exit your country freely as it likes and do absolutely whatever it wants. When I say Western capital, I'm not just talking about money, it's also people. So for example, the Epstein Island people, when they want to, play their games and use children from your country as props in their games, they do that. They used to and still do that in Kenya, for example, a lot. They do it in Nigeria, right? Eritrea closed off that door and said, our country's sovereignty and our people's well-being above all else. Now, the flip side of that is that the Eritrean diaspora, especially the Western diaspora, the US diaspora, which is used to an American-style way of living, will consider all of this to be draconian, to be dictatorial. So obviously, they will never have good things to say about it. It is what it is. Once upon a time, I would have been on their side. I would have said, this is like, humans need freedom. This is dictatorship, blah, blah, blah. As I've gotten older, I've realized how the world actually works. And I've realized that all those things are just buzzwords. They're literally just words that someone created for the sake of controlling other people. And that the very concept of freedom is a completely subjective and movable concept. There is no universal standard for what constitutes freedom. So I was
talking about that last week. It was somebody asked me, "What about freedom?" And I'm just like, "Man, freedom is a privilege. It's a concept."
A white person in the U.S. in the year 1923 might consider what they had to be freedom. They had the freedom to string up a black person on a tree and hold a picnic under it. That was a form of freedom, wasn't it?
Right.
They're technically not free to do that anymore. Yeah. So if someone were to complain that they're not as free as they used to be, is that valid? Because again, freedom is completely subjective and movable. It means whatever you want it to mean.
Right. And that's why you see so much of these politicians today under the Trump regime that is like trying to, put all these cases saying that it's discriminatory towards white men, because when you look into these cases, it's a lot of benefits that have been fought for decades for people of color. They're supposed to be black people, and there's a jealousy of just a percentage, not even like it's a lot, a percentage of what we're getting, and they want that as well too, and they don't see the country as free because they don't have access to that.
Exactly. Yeah. So freedom to them means I have the freedom to step on your head. That's freedom, right? So if you then decide that freedom to me, I don't know what's your picture seems to have frozen up. Okay, there you are. If you then decide that freedom to me means the ability to defend myself against you stepping on my head, even if it means that my people don't get to go on the gambling websites and they don't get to go on Pornhub, and this is what freedom means to me, Who is anyone to
Mhm.
say that that's not freedom? That's what freedom means to me. So if
Right.
Eritrea has chosen that path and that's what Eritrea considers to be freedom, I don't see why anyone should have any complaints about it.
Yeah, and it goes. It's self determination and economic growth. You know, that's what we
Yeah.
all, as anti-imperialists, want, and this is what we have to show people. You know what I mean? That's their business, and America, France, they have no right to be intervening in their business at all whatsoever.
Again,
I wanted.
again,
Yep.
again, it's that thing about weaponizing words, which I've noticed. Like
Yes.
nobody does that as excellently as this empire. They understand how to play with words and just basically turn words into things that mean whatever they want them to mean. So I was having this conversation with a Kenyan professor a couple of weeks back, and she said that muzungu is the Kenyan word for white person, right? That in the muzungu world, words are just things that you use to achieve a specific outcome. That words don't mean things. So in our culture, in African cultures, words mean specific things. A word has a meaning and that meaning never changes. It is fixed, it is specific. Meanwhile, in the world of the people that we're up against, words are subjective and movable. They mean whatever they want them to mean at any given point in time. And a clear example of this is exactly this conversation about freedom versus dictatorship. What is the greater dictatorship on this planet than a relatively small group of people getting to dictate to the entire world what development path they should use, what style of governance they should use, what style of economics they should run, whether their borders should be open, whether they should take part in so-called free trade, and whether they should be part of the so-called global financial system. It's
Right.
really
Right.
a small group of people dictating to everyone, and they
Yeah.
call that
Yeah.
freedom.
Right. Right. 15% of
But
the world, if you put the West together, and then it's 4% of
yeah,
the world when you put
yeah,
America in perspective.
yeah. So it's
Very
basically
small.
4% of the world dictating to 96% of the world, and the 96% is being told that this is freedom. And if you choose any path apart from this, then that is dictatorship and that is evil. Then you become the axis of evil.
Right.
Because that
They
used to
love
be a
that
thing when I
term.
was here. Yeah.
They love that term. Well, I just got two more questions. I'm gonna let you go. So we talked. They talked about the media went crazy. Like they hated the fact that Ibrahim Traoré was criticizing Western democracy and saying that we are not going to do that form of democracy. I'm paraphrasing what he's saying. Um, but he was talking about African democracy, a self determination democracy, right?
Right. So first of all, I'm going to be very upfront about this. It goes back to what I was just saying about words meaning or not meaning things.
Right.
Um, the very word democracy is one of the most weaponized words in existence, which is why I very publicly have chosen to disavow the entire word. There are many things about democracy that I don't have a problem with, but
Mhm.
because of the way the word itself has been weaponized, I've chosen as an act of resistance to thoroughly dissociate myself from that word. I'm not interested in
Mm,
democratic governance because of what it has come to me. Right
totally
now,
understand.
in Africa, when the term democracy is used, what it actually means, the democracy that is promoted across Africa, what it actually means is it basically boils down to one thing, which is having elections every every so often, maybe every 4 years, every 5 years. Now, every 4 or 5 years, or if there's a double term, every 8 or 10 years, there's a supposed change of government, right? And that's literally all that democracy means. And you're not supposed to look beyond that. Democracy basically means every 4 years there's a ritual where you go and you thumbprint in front of someone's picture, and that person becomes your president, right?
Mm, right, right.
What you are never supposed to examine those names on the ballot paper. How did they get there? Because whether or not you vote for any of those people, whether or not you take part in this electoral process or not, one of these names is 100% going to become your president, regardless of whatever you do about it, right?
Right.
First of all, how democratic is that? And then secondly, those names, what is the process by which those people came to be on the ballot paper? And when you examine this an inch beneath the surface, you then realize that pretty much every single one of those names at some point or the other has been part of some US International Visitors Leadership Program, or some Mandela Washington Fellowship, or some Young African Leaders Initiative. The US State Department has its fingers in all of these pies, right? And at some point, or if it's not the US, then it's the UK, and it's the Chevening Scholarship thing, which is run by the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, which is basically the State Department of the UK. And you realize that pretty much everyone that is put in front of you as an electoral choice was put in front of you by a foreign power. You were never in control of it.
Yep.
So there's a whole machinery under the surface which is not visible to most people, which, you know, it's not advertised, but it's there. It throws up these acceptable choices. And then you have this whole ritual where people make a lot of noise about selecting one of these, you know, different flavors of the same hydra. And then one of them becomes the president and nothing changes. And they call that democracy. And because you went through that ritual, that makes it a good thing.
Right.
And the minute you suggest that maybe there's another way of shooting, because the truth is that the only the only test for leadership is what results did it deliver. And going by that test, these leaders have all not delivered anything. Life has not improved materially in decades. So the minute you suggest that maybe there's another way and maybe this democracy is not working, then everyone comes down hard on you. Then the media and the civil society space, which are obviously funded by the same people, they come down on you like a ton of bricks. You know, you're not allowed to even express certain thoughts. A couple of months back, I remember I was on RT discussing African democracy alongside a popular Nigerian civil society individual, right? So the organization he leads is called I forget what it's called, a YIAGA. Basically, what they do is election monitoring, right? That's basically what they do. And Shock Gasp is funded by NED, right? So this guy is on RT with me, and we're going back and forth. And I'm trying to make the argument that who decided that this system where there is a hidden hand selecting a tiny handful of people for you to choose from, who all run on the same policies, run on the same manifesto, who all promise to implement the same IMF recommendations, who all promise to follow the same World Bank advice, you know, who decided that this is the gold standard for what leadership should be? Who decided that there's no other way? Who decided that Ibrahim Traore and his leadership style and even the way he came into power is not preferable to this, given that Ibrahim Traore's leadership is delivering better material results for the Burkinabe people than this supposed electoral democracy is delivering for those of us in Nigeria and elsewhere. And this guy launches into this whole spiel about how electoral democracy is the gold standard, and regardless of blah blah blah, that this is the only sustainable way. You know, the buzzword soup you expect from these people, right? And you know, again, just go to his organization's website. It states right at the bottom, funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. NED is a CIA cutout, right? So these guys have got so good at like embedding themselves at all levels of your information space that you are just constantly being pumped full of rhetoric and narrative that's coming out of Washington, and you don't even realize where it's coming from. And because you're hearing it from so many different places, you start to think that this is the truth. You start to assume that if everybody's saying it, then it must be true, and it's just propaganda.
Right.
You know, so that's where I stand on this whole democracy thing. I don't want to hear that word. That word is one of the most bastardized and weaponized words on this continent. So anyone who comes to me talking about how they're trying to deepen democracy or they're trying to promote it, I instantly file them away in person. I have no interest in speaking.
No, I don't. I do not blame you. I totally agree, especially when you see how Ibrahim Traoré has, his administration has built more roads than France has done in the last 60 years. That tells you something. That tells you something. They're building infrastructure. They're building. My light went out. 1 second. 1 second, guys. Hold on. Having a tech issue. I'll be right. All right. So yeah, when you build so much infrastructure in such a short time, because it's only been like 3 years since
Four
they have been in
years. Huh?
power. 4 years. You know what I mean? That's such a big improvement. And the West does not want people to see that at all.
Exactly.
Because that's just going to make people question, all right, if they could do that in Africa, why the hell we have all these problems in Latin America and all these places? Why can't
The main reason why the example of Burkina Faso in particular is such a problem for the usual suspects is how Burkina Faso is funding all this infrastructural development. It's very simple. All the mining revenue that used to go into the pockets of white people, they nationalized everything. It's as simple as that.
Right.
They didn't do anything spectacular. They just nationalized the mines. So like the gold production, which used to benefit private business interests in Europe and in Australia and Canada, that money is now going to the state budgets. That's what they're using to build roads and hospitals. It's as simple as that. And they fear that once the rest of Africa catches on to this, because again, a lot of investment has gone over the past 30, 40 years into promoting the idea that nationalizing minerals is economically illiterate. It's a Cold War idea. It's an old, outdated, old-fashioned communist idea that with the fall of the Soviet Union, that argument has been won and lost. So, like government has no business in business. That's one, like I've been hearing that phrase since I was a child. It's promoted so heavily. So everything should be privatized. Everything should be given to the private sector to run. And when they say private sector, they don't mean private sector owned by people that look like you and I. No. They mean, Peter von Whiteberg Manson. That's private sector. That's the one they're referring to, right? And they've promoted that very successfully over the past 30 to 40 years. And now they're realizing that once a new generation of Africans who weren't around to who haven't really had that propaganda hammered into them yet, who are still sort of ideologically flexible, once they realize that there's no cosmic Bible anywhere where it's written that a country shouldn't own and use its own resources to benefit its people. Like the idea that your oil should primarily benefit some Shell or some Eni or some Exxon Mobil is a completely contrived idea.
Yeah,
it's just what somebody said. It's not true. They're afraid that once the example of Burkina Faso becomes mainstream, a whole generation of African youth, the light bulb is going to go off above their heads, and they're going to realize, hey, wait a minute, we have bauxite and manganese and platinum and gold and diamonds and all this in our country. So why don't we have health centers? Why don't we have roads? Why don't we have technical institutes, schools, universities? Why don't we have basic infrastructure? Because we actually can have the money to build these things. All it takes for us to have the money is to just nationalize these things. We don't need to take on debt. We don't need a foreign investor to build these things for us. We can build it ourselves. And if Burkina Faso, which 5 or 6 years ago was the second poorest country in the world by, in terms of per capita GDP, is now building 5,000 kilometers of roads per year, then why can't we?
And they're debt free.
Exactly. It's as simple as that. Like there is this whole the primary layer of warfare in Africa is not military, it's epistemic, it's informational warfare. That is the primary layer of warfare. We are brainwashed to hell and back. That's actually the problem. And the example of the Sahel is going to reverse that brainwashing the longer it goes on.
And I'm very
That's
excited and
basically
living in
what's
this
going
time
on.
for that. Very excited
Same
for
here.
that. I got one more question. I'm gonna let you go because it's very weird what's going on in South Africa. First with Julius Malema, being is he still in jail or is he out right now?
He's not actually in jail yet. He's been given leave to appeal.
Okay. And then also they're deporting Zimbabweans and people from Ghana as well too in South Africa. What's going on with this government right now? What do you know about that?
The most important thing to understand about South Africa is that it's a battleground state in Africa. Its official foreign policy is leftist. Its official foreign policy is pro-Palestine. Obviously, the ruling party was literally born out of an African independence movement.
Oh yeah,
The
Winnie
African National
Mandela.
Congress. Yeah, it's not really that anymore. It's now more like a neoliberal center-right party, but that's where its ideological roots still lie, and there's still many things about the South African state which are still considered revolutionary up until now. Now, as I'm sure you know, there exists a very significant minority of South Africans, white South Africans, and people of South African descent who would very much like to completely transform the South African state into something that more closely resembles what it was prior to 1994.
Of course.
One of these people is the supposed world's first trillionaire, whose name shall not be mentioned. And over the past year and a half, you've seen an escalating series of actions designed to diplomatically isolate and discredit South Africa in the global space. So it started with the so-called white genocide kite, which was being flown.
Yeah.
So the idea was, these guys have taken Israel to the ICJ and successfully argued that Israel is committing genocide. I mean, everybody knows Israel is committing genocide, but this was the country that actually took it to, that actually made it legal, made it formal. No one else did.
Right.
So, first of all, that means that the revolutionary underpinnings of the South African state are still very much present, even though economically it runs as a center-right neoliberal economy. But ideologically, there are still elements who are still closer to the ideological roots of the ANC, such as those who took Israel to the ICJ.
Right.
Which means that South Africa still remains a formidable obstacle, or South Africa's foreign policy still remains an obstacle. And also bear in mind, South Africa is still officially part of BRICS. So Russia is a South African ally, officially, even to date. So for those people who look at Africa as a giant cake to be divvied up, and who see the decolonization of Africa, or the imperfect decolonization of Africa during the Cold War, as a historical tragedy, people who see the loss of European empires in Africa as a tragedy, and who dream of someday reoccupying and recolonizing Africa, we know who these people are, again, including the world's first trillionaire. To these people, the South African state needs to be fundamentally reshaped. South Africa as an obstacle needs to be taken off the board. So first discredited using the white genocide thing. That didn't stick. And then start covertly arming and supplying separatist elements within South Africa. So if you've ever heard of this whites-only enclave called Orania, which is in the northern Cape in South Africa, earlier this year, the office of the US First Lady started sending Starlink kits to Orania under the official seal of the office of the First Lady of the United States. Bear in mind, Starlink is not legal in South Africa. And essentially, this means that Orania now has access to independent communications equipment that is independent of the South African state, and that cannot be monitored by the South African state. That is an act of war.
Yeah, I'm like, how is that even possible? Because Starlink is banned in South Africa. So, the fact that they're even doing that is just like, people need to be prosecuted.
And they're not hiding it. It's appearing. There's a picture on Twitter. You can see the official seal of the First Lady of the US. And they're sending Starlink
Wow.
kits, right, to
Wow.
this enclave that has its own currency and its own flag, which closely resembles the flag of apartheid South Africa, right? And then, parallel to all of this happening, the new US ambassador to South Africa, a guy called Brent Brazell, who's a raging Zionist, shock gasp. He comes in, and the first thing he does is basically starts interfering in local politics. He starts making statements about how, this song that caused furore, "Kill the Boer,"
Oh, yeah,
with
yeah. I love that song.
So it was ruled by South African courts as part of South Africa's anti-apartheid heritage. You can't ban it because it's a struggle song, right? And this guy, who is supposed to be an ambassador, goes and addresses a public gathering, and he says he doesn't care what the South African court says. An ambassador, a diplomat. So he gets summoned by the South African. He gets summoned by the South African Foreign Ministry, and there's a whole back and forth. And then a few days after that, he goes and has a meeting with separatists in the Western Cape. So you might not know this. In the Western Cape of South Africa, which is where Cape Town is located, there's a whole movement called Western Cape Independence Movement, which is led by white people for the purpose of seceding from South Africa and creating a white ethno state. Western Cape ethno state, basically. And this guy, who's supposedly the US ambassador, goes and meets with these separatists. Something else that will blow your mind about this is that the leader of this supposed Western Cape independence movement, a guy called Phil Craig, is a British citizen. He's not even a South African citizen. He's a British citizen who is resident in South Africa, right? He's a British guy born and raised in England who went with his British passport to South Africa, liked it, decided to settle down there, gain legal residency, set up a political party, and started agitating to secede from South Africa because South Africa has too many black people. And then this new US ambassador goes and meets with these people.
This is crazy. Like they haven't stopped.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Here I am thinking like, oh, the white people lost a lot of power. They gotta coincide with the black government. No.
They were just biding their time. They were just biding their time. So now, after that happens, then this some lady called Jacinta Ngubese, who was she was a radio host on an obscure radio station, like a complete nobody. All of a sudden, in South Africa, you can't put on your TV, you can't put on your radio and escape her. All of a sudden, she's everywhere, and you know what that means.
Yeah.
Wow. Someone is obviously pushing her, right? Because why does this random person all of a sudden get all this coverage? How?
A lot of money behind her.
Yeah, exactly. And she starts this thing called March and March, where they're supposedly going after illegal immigrants. Then it always moves from illegal to any immigrants at all. Because there's a long-standing issue. There's a long-standing xenophobia issue in South Africa, obviously. But that has always been there, and that hasn't necessarily done anything. It's just a thing. It's just a fact of life there. It's like racist white people, right? It doesn't stop you from living in the US. It's just a fact of life, right? Now, all of a sudden, it starts turning violent, and they start issuing deadlines by June 30. All foreigners have left South Africa. And then, while all of this is happening, the news media, which is entirely controlled by the usual suspects, just keeps giving them coverage, more and more and more coverage, such that what started off as a tiny group, less than 100 people, has now become like this phenomenon because the media keeps promoting it. So even those who might have had these bigotries or whatever, but who were never going to act on them, they feel emboldened now because the media is telling them that this is this phenomenon sweeping the nation.
Right. Just like
that's having exactly. So that's having two effects. First, it's turning South Africa itself into a tinderbox, and then more importantly, on the African continent, it's turning South Africa into a pariah. Where to the extent that some days back, South Africa played a World Cup game against Mexico, and the rest of Africa was supporting Mexico. That has never happened before. Yeah, like there were.
Oh man.
You can look this up. You can look this up. There's videos on social media. There were Nigerians who, like Nigerians living in the US, who, because the game was in Mexico, they traveled to Mexico City. They bought Mexico shirts, and they were all like, "We are all Mexicans today." Yeah, that's a thing, right? That has never happened before. Where the loss of soft power on the continent, because South Africa, has a lot of soft power, has a lot of cultural influence. Right. So that loss of soft power, that in itself is very significant. So it's now getting to a point where you're now seeing people openly saying stuff like, if apartheid comes back to South Africa, we're going to support the white people. Because basically, like, there's this huge well of resentment towards South Africa now on the continent. Another thing is that a lot of the visuals showing supposedly foreigners being lynched or whatever, a lot of those visuals are not even visuals of what they claim to be, which is another sign of a sponsored information campaign. Someone is intentionally trying to stoke the fire. So you see some viral video from 3 years ago of maybe a thief being lynched or something. Someone goes and takes that video and says, "Oh, a Malawian guy was just lynched by South African rioters or something." And then everybody gets so angry. Why are you killing other Africans? And I'm not saying they're not killing other Africans, but a lot of those claims are not even true.
So we have a disinformation campaign.
Exactly. Someone is shaking the jar very, very vigorously, such that inevitably, when the whole thing goes up in flames, someone is clearly trying to create a crisis on June 30, right? Which is why they keep drumming that deadline into everybody's head, that on June 30 the sky is going to fall down, right? Someone actually wants the sky to fall down on June 30, such that when that happens and then the South African government basically collapses politically, then the only political group left that will be strong and organized enough to offer a solution, to offer an alternative, will be the Democratic Alliance, who, as I'm sure you're aware, are the usual suspects. And here we go.
Wow. June 30. What day is? 5 days. 5 days. Wow, that's crazy. I did not expect. I did not expect all that. So it makes sense why Julius Malema has to be put away. It makes sense that the EFF as a part of the coalition ruling body has to be attacked as well too. It makes perfect sense on why this is happening.
Absolutely.
That's crazy.
Absolutely.
Well, David,
and by the way, I forgot to mention this. Parallel to all of this happening, very coincidentally, a corruption probe against the sitting president has been launched in Parliament. A probe which could very well lead to him losing his seat.
And he's a billionaire too, so they probably got a lot of stuff on him.
Yeah, this was a corruption probe, which, by the way, existed before he came into office, and it's just been sort of sat in suspended animation, and then all of this starts, and then now it's been deployed. So we can see where this is going.
Yep. Well, I guess we need to start talking about this with other people. Spread the word, because this is a big deal. You do not want an apartheid South Africa to come back, especially when we're trying to get rid of the apartheid that's existing right now. So this is absolutely discouraging, but it's really good information for people to learn and understand. So I want to thank you so much, David, for coming on this show and blessing Jabari Media, man. You are welcome to here anytime, bro. So guys, please go check out The Spearhed. There's a lot of good research and stuff on there if you want to learn more about Africa. I think I'm going to make sure that I share this out to a lot of Black organizers so they can understand what's going on as well too, because we got to keep the connection going. I want to thank you so much for coming on, brother.
Thank you for having me.
Have a really good day. What time is it over there?
It's 3:05 p.m.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, thank you so much. You have a really good day, my brother.
You too.
And to everybody on the airwaves, we are out.
Blank period, yeah. On my black, brown, and indigenous. Gotta holler if you really feeling this. Gotta holler if you really real enough. Other rappers is delirious. Yeah, it's really that serious. Better holler if you really feeling me. I gotta keep it 100, ayy. If you don't like it, then fuck it, ayy. We gonna win in the end, yeah, we gonna live in abundance. I gotta keep it 100, ayy. If you don't like it, then fuck it, ayy. We gonna win in the end, yeah, we gonna. I gotta keep it 100. We gotta stop all the stunting. You know we coming from nothing. Yo, you talking about money, you bluffing. We gotta do something different. We gotta change how we live in. We gotta do better for women. We gotta do better for children. We gotta listen to victims, whether Jewish or Muslim or Christian. It doesn't matter your religion. You gotta stand against the system, or else you just another villain. How you just sitting there chilling?